Hey everybody, this is Blake Jones, and this is CRP 101. Please forgive me if the technology is a little clunky here. I'm trying to record this on um, Zoom, but we will make it happen right now. So thank you so much for joining me. This is a brief overview of citizen review panels that I call CRP 101. I am a faculty member at the University of Kentucky in the College of Social Work. I'm also a husband and a father. I'm a therapist for about 23 years, and I've been involved with citizen review panels for about over 20 years now. So when they initially started, I was the program coordinator for Kentucky citizen review panels, and I've done a lot of research and publishing and technical assistance and things like that for CRPs over time. So I always like to start out with a quote. This is probably one that you've seen. Never doubt that a small dedicated group of citizens can make a difference. A difference, indeed, is the only thing that ever has. This quote is not quite as exciting. This is by Sherry Arnstein, a researcher back in the 60s. And she said that the idea of citizen participation is a lot like eating spinach. No one's against it because it's good for you. That's not a very inspiring quote, is it? So we know intuitively that citizen participation is a good thing, but it's very hard in child welfare, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So for this presentation, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the history of citizen involvement in public child welfare, talk to you about the literature that we've been able to publish around citizen review panels, and really just give you some practical advice about your panel. So when we look at the literature talks a lot about authentic communication. And what that means is just honest communication between CRPs and the Child Welfare Agency. We found that that impacts the perceived effectiveness of the panels. This is probably the most important thing that we've ever looked at, and that's that panels have clear goals and objectives. Um, as you know, the mandate for citizen review panels is very big. And so what I've seen over the years is that panels get off track a lot, and they um, just struggle with having, you know, really focusing on what they're supposed to be doing for the year. And so I encourage you to engage in a very strong strategic plan that's focused and that you have clear goals and objectives. CRP members certainly need training, and this is probably goes without saying, but there's a lot to learn with citizen review panels and child welfare, so training is very important. Self-governance is needed, and improved group cohesion is very important. So I encourage you to deal with any problems that you have in your group and to really work on that group cohesion. This is just something I found during my dissertation, again, by Sherry Arnstein, who had that quote I showed you a minute ago. She considered citizen involvement through the lens of this ladder. It's kind of a conceptual thing that she came up with. But it goes all the way to the top to citizen control and all the way to the bottom at manipulation. And so I want you just to consider where your panel is on this ladder. Now, I certainly don't think that citizens should have control over the Child Welfare Agency, but I do think that they should be around rung 7 or 6, delegated power, partnership. A lot of what I've seen with panels is that as they are consulted occasionally, or they're informed about policy or initiatives, but you should have this strong partnership with your child welfare agency. Some panels are manipulated. I'm not sure what she means by therapy. I've thought about that as a therapist. I'm not really sure what that means. I can't even guess. So anyway, I hope you're not in therapy with your child welfare agency. So the context of citizen participation is that um, children were languishing in foster care for years, left unsafe. Families were being kind of ripped apart. And so these several federal mandates came. The Child Abuse and Prevention Treatment Act came in 1974, and it created a lot of things that states had to do. CASA came out of this, state representation for children in courts. The Adoption Assistance and Child Welfare Act came in 1980, and this created this process for review for foster care review boards. And CAPTA was reauthorized in 1996, and that's where citizen review panels came from. And Congress requires you to requires your state to establish at least 3 panels. Some states need only 1 based on their the number of people they have in their state. But you're supposed to review compliance with that state CAPTA plan and look at any other federal child protection that you need to. CAPTA was reauthorized in 2003, and it requires you to do public outreach, so public forums, surveys, things like that. You're supposed to evaluate practice as well as policy and procedure. And the Child Welfare Agency has to respond to your annual report within 6 months. Again, they don't have to implement your suggestions, but they do have to respond to them. CAPTA was reauthorized again in 2010, and it required a study to Congress about the effectiveness of citizen review panels. And they also said that it may include an adult former victim of child abuse and neglect. We know that there are lots of challenges to collaboration. Citizens I've talked to feel like they are kind of treading water. Sometimes they have trouble understanding the complexity of the state agency. And as I mentioned before, it's difficult to choose an evaluative topic that has any substance. There are lots of citizen groups out there also looking at child welfare. There is certainly distrust from frontline workers, as you can imagine. There's lots of acronyms. I don't know what they are in your state, but you know, there's the PIP, there's the NCAN, CFSR. And so I think panel members get overwhelmed by that. There's usually a time lag between when initiatives are launched and then citizen groups are informed. Some people say, you know, I had to read it in the paper. And then sometimes citizen review panel members see citizen review panels as a way to have their own agenda. And this is very dangerous here. And I've seen this happen again and again and again. You'll get one person who's very angry with the child welfare system for whatever reason, and they just simply use the panel's time to disparage the child welfare system. They don't want to be fair. They don't want to do any work. They just want to complain about the child welfare system. And those people are very dangerous to the panel itself, because it becomes this thing of, you know, they're just given an audience to share their own agenda, and panel members become discouraged. Panel members that want to do work become discouraged. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. When I think about child welfare administrators, they speak their own language. They speak a language of budget. There's usually politics involved. When something bad happens, they tend to circle the wagons and, you know, protect their people. And they usually have this sense of we know best. And then they're looking for incremental change. Citizens, on the other hand, usually have a sense of personal passion, sometimes experience. They want change now, and they're used to working in coalitions. And they're ready to use public shame if necessary. When I was coordinator of Kentucky, there was more than one time that I would read an angry letter to the editor in the paper that I knew nothing about. And I sort of, you know, and it was about the child welfare system, which was not good. You know, they didn't like that, and they were mad at me because I didn't warn them about that. And so I had to be diplomatic and kind of help clean that mess up. There are about almost 350 citizen review panels in all 50 states, including DC and Puerto Rico. About 30 states provide some staff assistance. In the study in 2013, no states reviewed the CAPTA plan, and only 33 states provided some kind of written response to the work of the panels. So as I mentioned, CAPTA requires states to have 3 panels in place by July of 1999. States are supposed to look at that CAPTA plan and really any other criteria that they find important in child protection. They're supposed to be composed of volunteer members that are broadly representative of their community and have expertise in prevention of child abuse and neglect. So when I think of broadly representative, I think of not only ethnic and cultural diversity, but diversity of thought and diversity of experience. So I would encourage you to have members of the faith community on your team, educators, healthcare workers, mental health workers, first responders. To me, that's a really diverse team that you should shoot for. You're supposed to meet at least quarterly. I encourage groups to touch base every month. And you're supposed to have look at policies and procedures and specific cases. I discourage panels from looking at cases because I think, the state is already doing that. They're very, very time consuming, and you really have to look at a lot of them to make any sense of systemic issues, which is really what you're after. You're looking at those systemic issues. It's really important you maintain confidentiality because you have wide latitude in looking at materials. And then you're supposed to prepare an annual report with your activities and any recommendations that you have. So how can you do that? Well, you can certainly look at cases if you want to. My point was that you just have to look at a lot of them to make any sense. You can look at your data systems, you can look at policies, you can do surveys, community forums, you can do focus groups. Again, making sure that you're being fair and you're listening to everybody. Most CRPs are coordinated by someone within the state child welfare agency, and we can talk about whether or not that's fair or whether or not that's wise. I've seen it work both ways. Certainly if you have someone who is supportive of the panels, then it can work. Sometimes I feel like state child welfare agency people, though, feel torn between the panels and their employers. And so if you can, I encourage you to have an entity outside of the child welfare system to coordinate your panels. Lots of panels struggle with diversity on their group. And then some struggle with their mission. As I mentioned, some panels and some panel members very much see their job as kind of this watchdog of the child welfare agency. And then others see their role as advocates for the agency. I believe that panels should be right in the middle of that. If there are things going on in the agency that are not working, that are not right, that are not helpful to kids and families, then that needs to be said. However, I also think it's okay to advocate for your agency and to support them and encourage them and find things that are going well and write about them. Retention of members is difficult. And again, what I've seen over the 2 decades that I've been doing this is that panel members get on the panel for passion. And so, they can just bring their passion and their heart to the work. But if there's no clear plan, if there's somebody on the group that just kind of has their agenda and discourages people, then they will quickly rotate off. There's lots of turnover and there's lots of difficulty in connecting with the CFSR. So research really tells us that you're supposed to be given access to information and consulted really early in the policy development process. Um, it's not okay for a child welfare administrator to come in with a fully formed policy that they've already decided on and say, here, what do you think about this? They should come in way before the policy is developed and ask your opinion. You should be given feedback about your recommendations and not just in the formal response, but throughout the year. You should be provided staff, logistical support, and you're really part of a thoughtful exercise, not just, well, we're required to have citizen review panels, so, here they are, and we'll give them minimal support and we won't really listen to them. Um, what works best is part of a thoughtful exercise. I want to tell you real quickly about a topic that one of my panels did a few years ago in Kentucky that I thought was brilliant. So a few years ago in Kentucky, we still have problems with drugs, as I'm sure your state does as well, but there was a real problem with meth in the eastern part of our state. And what was happening is that, child welfare workers were being called to um, drug houses, meth lab houses, and drug exposed children. And what they were doing was removing the kids from the trailer or house or whatever, taking them out in the yard and finding a water hose, kind of stripping them naked and hosing them down. Now, this was very traumatizing to the kids, as you can imagine. The child welfare workers were just trying to help them, but they were doing it in a very inept way. And so my panel at that time said, let's study this topic. Let's just look at it. So they looked at policy. How are workers trained? They talked to workers, they talked to supervisors, they talked to law enforcement and others. And at the end of that, it was a year, they looked at that topic. At the end of that, they made recommendations for how the child welfare workers were trained around drug exposed children. And the state adopted some of those recommendations. So a small group of people in eastern Kentucky affected change throughout the state of Kentucky. And in my opinion, affected change with regard to keeping kids safer in those situations. So that's an example of a focused topic. They were interested in it. There were data around it. There was policy. They looked at what other states were doing. And at the end of it, they came out with a really good, solid recommendation that was adopted by the state. So to me, that embodies everything that we're looking for with citizen review panels. There are benefits to having good relationships with citizens. Citizens can advocate, they can see things that the agency can't. And I've really seen some states are very reactive, not only to citizen review panels, but just in general. Something bad happens and they react to that. I encourage states to be proactive around citizen review panels. Use them, create a good plan, and use them the way they are intended. I hope there's a consistent liaison in your group through the Child Welfare Agency. I definitely think that child protection should help with your strategic plan. I think they should be a part of it. They should not dictate what you do, but they should be part of it. And as I mentioned, I hope they give you frequent feedback as well. Another quick story. We love stories in Kentucky, so I want to tell you another quick story. I was in a meeting one time with our commissioner, who's the top person that oversees child welfare, 6,000 or so employees in our child welfare agency. And we met with her a couple of times a year to talk with her about our recommendations and, plans that she had and questions that she had about things. And we were sitting in this meeting, and there was an attorney who was sitting next to me. He was a panel member, and he was one of those guys that sort of, his day job was to kind of sue the child welfare agency, or not sue them, but represent parents in law, different actions that involve the agency. Um, he was a good attorney, but he also was very outspoken, as many attorneys are. And as the commissioner started to speak, he pulled out, I don't know if you could see my phone or not, probably not, but he pulled out his phone and he put it on record, and he said, you know, I, he just put it in front of her, started recording her without her permission. And she looked down at that and said, "Are you recording me?" He said, "Yes, I am." And she got very frustrated and angry about that. And she told him to stop, and he did. But from then on, for about 2 years, um, that was an issue. Just that simple act of disrespect to her was an issue. And when I would go up to where she worked, people would see me in the hall and they would laugh about that, and they would say, "She's still really mad about that." It took a very long time to undo what he did. Simple act of disrespect. The other picture I want to show you is of a couple of panel members who saw a need. We used to meet at a child welfare agency, and there were visitation rooms for the kids, and they were just all dirty and nasty, and the toys were gross and filthy. So these guys got together and they helped build a toy box for the kids. It's a beautiful piece of art, really, that they helped build, but some other kids in the community built as well. Teenage kids built, and that toy box was also the subject of a lot of discussion in the child welfare agency, because it was an act of kindness that they didn't forget and that they really appreciated. So the point of all this is that there's so much riding on your relationship with the child welfare agency. Don't get into this contentious, angry relationship. Stay focused on children and families and what you need to do to help the agency become better. I encourage you to have a memo of agreement with your agency that spells out what you're going to share. I encourage you to have joint meetings. Make sure your coordinator is well known in the state. Have them connect with other people through listservs and other things. Think about who's missing in your group. Again, I talked about some of those other um, professions, non-professionals you should have on your group. Think about who's missing and to really develop a plan around recruiting. And it's very important to remember why people volunteer. I get asked to do a lot of things, and some I do, many I don't. And the reason that I do things, volunteer work, is because it's meaningful, it's organized, um, it makes an impact in the world. And I've quit a lot of things that are just kind of these mindless meetings where people are just, chasing rabbits. There's no agenda, there's no strategic plan. It's just pointless. It's just a pointless waste of my time. And so I won't stay on boards like that, and I hope you won't either. Child welfare agencies should clearly define your roles and responsibilities, again, through that memo of understanding, giving feedback. I'm a big fan of term limits for citizen review panels. I think you should have a way for people to cycle on and off of the panel. I think that's very important. Work on team development. As I mentioned, make sure that your chairperson is very strong, their leadership abilities are very strong, and provide at least a part-time staff person. You can be creative. I hope you work with your local university. They can add so much to your work. Celebrate your success and ultimately value your citizenship. This is very important work that you're doing. Here are some references if you're interested in reading more. And I'll leave you with one of my favorite quotes: "Children are the living messages we send to a time we will not see." So your work is very, very important. I hope you'll stay in touch with me. If I can help you in any way, I hope you'll let me know. Good luck.